Hey folks, Lachlan here again, speaking to you from just outside of Durban, South Africa. As usual, when I speak in long form rants, as I'm about to do now, let me get the obvious out of the way first. Yes, I have a severe physical disability that has an effect on the way I move and speak. Now, you can either deal with that and continue to watch, you can click away from this video, or you can call me a retard in the comments. Either way, I really don't care, because I'm still going to say what I have to say. Now, what I wanted to talk about in this video is basically the fundamental differences between a country like South Africa and the West in general. When I say the West, I suppose I'm going to focus mainly on America because that's where the majority of my international friends are, although I do have friends in other places as well. The reason I'm inspired to talk about this is that I spend a lot of time on YouTube because my physical disability isolates me socially to a large degree. And I use YouTube for a wide variety of topics. But every now and again, I have to laugh because a video will come across my recommended feed with a hyperbolic title claiming that America is on the brink of collapse. And I know why this is done. Hyperbolic titles are what draw attention, and attention is what gets views. But this whole trend got me thinking that I should explain what real collapse is like and what it's like to live in a nation that is actually falling apart. So that's what I'm going to do by trying to illustrate just two main differences between South Africa and the US. Firstly, when you live in an actually collapsing country like South Africa, something you get used to is a lack of public service. And I mean that even in the most fundamental and basic ways. As South Africans, we cannot reliably trust that, for example, our household refuse will be picked up by government garbage collectors every week. Because from week to week, sometimes they just don't show up. And it can sometimes be for a number of weeks that they don't come by to pick up the rubbish. This can happen for a number of reasons. The garbage collectors themselves can go on strike because they are unhappy with their working conditions, usually because they want to push for a pay raise. Or it can be something as simple as the garbage truck broke down and the government has squandered the money so profoundly that they don't have the resources to have the truck repaired. And that's just a fact of life. And that kind of thing extends to every part of our national infrastructure. Anyone who knows anything about South Africa will know that we have been struggling with electrical instability in the national grid for over 15 years. And to this day, at any point, large parts of the grid could go down, resulting in rolling blackouts across the country. And what this kind of thing does is it forces you to adapt. Every South African essentially has some kind of backup plan. Wealthy people have large generators running their homes, or they have transitioned to solar power, which I must point out our government now wants to charge people for doing, even though the people who resorted to powering their homes through solar panels have only really done so because of the government's inability to provide a stable source of power. I should also explain that by and large, the generation of electricity is a monopoly held by the government itself, one which they only recently have been willing to part with to a small extent. And the same issues, as I say, extend across everything: water, roads, sanitation, anything you can think of basically is falling apart. And what this means is that as a population, South Africans have become desensitized to these problems. And every time a new one pops up, we just find a way to work around it. Because our political class live in a completely different world than we do. They are not affected by the problems we face because their comfortable government salaries, as well as all the money that they steal through corruption, ensure that they don't face the problems on the ground because they can just pay someone to sort it out for them, unlike most South Africans. The other aspect of living in an actually collapsing country is that you become very aware of your own surroundings and you stop trusting strangers like you would do in a society that was actually functioning as intended. Sadly, South Africans are always kind of on the alert for security risks, at least those who choose to see the world as it actually is rather than seeing it as they would like it to be. The fact is, South Africa is one of the most dangerous places in the world, with among the highest rates of violent crime and sexual assault anywhere on the planet. To live here without going insane, you essentially have to accept that that is the reality, all the while still trying to do whatever you can to find some sort of joy in life. For me, as somebody who has been wheelchair bound since birth, and the fact that I'm white, in a country with a majority black government that actively hates people of my race for the crimes of apartheid, in which I was too young to know about or participate, I have had to accept that it is pointless to set any goals for my future or to have any major hopes. I don't plan my life more than maybe a few days or a few weeks ahead, never mind a month or 6 months, because in South Africa, you simply can't do that. It's just not feasible. It's silly because things can go from bad to worse without warning, and basically then you are stuck in a Mad Max scenario, as happened to me in July 2021 when I survived a large scale riot that happened right on the edge of my street. That happened in the wake of former South African President Jacob Zuma's arrest on corruption charges. And I've talked about this before, but because of the topic of this video, it helps to illustrate my point. I live about a kilometer away from a large shopping mall. And during those riots, which lasted about a week, malls were among the places most heavily targeted for looting and destruction. And as I say, being a kilometer away, there was one point where a mob of 700 angry Zulus stood at the end of my street. If things had gone slightly differently that day, I probably would not be alive to be making this video. And so that's what I mean by desensitization. Because as South Africans, we live in circumstances that your average American can't even comprehend. I'll give you an example that occurred to me just a couple days ago. A friend of mine, shout out to you, Jesse, he asked me if he could have my postal address so that he could send me an invitation to his wedding, because even though I wouldn't be able to get there, to America that is, because as I say, I'm both disabled and financially poor, Jesse still wanted me to have a wedding invitation as a sign of his gratitude and our enduring friendship. I had to tell him that I can't give him an address because right now South Africa does not have a functional national postal service, and we haven't for some years because the reality is that our government is so inept and so corrupt that they can't even manage a post office. I wish that was a joke. It is not. Everything in South Africa essentially moves through private couriers now because what little of the post office does remain is inefficient, and you are likely to have whatever you try to send to someone stolen from you before it ever reaches its destination. So I guess the point I'm trying to make with all this is that if you're American and you feel that your country is on the edge of collapse, think again, because for all its problems, and I'm not saying America is a perfect country with no problems, far from it. I'm very well aware that the culture war of the last decade or so has torn at the essential fabric of American society, and that America is probably as socially and politically polarized as it's ever been. So I'm aware that America has its own problems, and I do try to empathize with those on a serious and honest level. But I guess what I'm trying to do is to assure Americans that while you have problems, they are nowhere near as severe, profound, or entrenched as those we have here. Because as somebody who has lived in South Africa my entire life, I see the situation we're facing now, and I frankly don't see a way out of it. I don't see how these problems can be rectified because the ANC has allowed poverty and lawlessness and corruption to become facts of everyday life because they are the principal beneficiaries of these things. So, although South Africa actually does have everything it needs to be a prosperous country, the ANC in particular wants it to remain unstable, impoverished, and dangerous because they themselves will stay rich no matter what happens. As always, I hope that you found something useful in my content, and if not, too bad. Look after yourselves, take care of each other, and for now, farewell.